Hey guys, it's Nate, and it's time for bite sized. So I don't have anything super heavy to talk about, and this is actually take number two. Unlike one shot or one take, Wes, I need multiple takes to sometimes get my things done. But I did want to take a couple minutes and maybe talk, like just for briefly, some spicy-ish takes on just some recent-ish news in game stuff and sort of weigh in a little bit. Um, as far as anything specific, and like I had done a previous iteration of this where I was sort of like trying to react to headlines and sort of do a little bit of a bite-sized news segment. And frankly, there wasn't anything that was really popping up, and so I'm, whatever. Sorry. You weren't really missing out on that much. What I thought I might do is take a couple of minutes each to talk about three of like the bigger headlines or bigger sort of stories, or one each rather. One for Nintendo, one for Sony or for PlayStation, and one for Microsoft. And sort of just like bigger stories that I had seen. So let's kick this off with I'm actually gonna pull this up, and it was the big hullabaloo, but a hacker, um okay, and like, oh, this is such good radio. You guys are just getting the best. But a hacker by the name of Gary Bowser was released from prison, and recently, I think within the last couple of days. And in 2021, he had been sentenced to 40 months in prison and fined $14.5 million. And the article I'm referencing is the art IGN, their write up by Rebecca Valentine. Um, so the article sort of indicates that he was indicted back in 2020 alongside Max Luarn and Yuaning Chen. I probably butchered that last name, but they were part of Team Executor. It's a hacking ring that basically allowed, they sold chips that allowed users to play pirated games. Uh, um, so ultimately, even though he had a smaller role in the operation, um, because apparently he did marketing PR, which that's weird. He was the only one of the three that was ultimately tried and convicted in the U.S. Chen, a Chinese national, was never arrested, and Luan was never able to be extradited to the U.S. He was initially charged with 11 felonies, including wire fraud, conspiracy to circumvent technological measures, trafficking circumvention devices, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. He pled guilty to two of the charges and was sentenced to initially a $4.5 million fine, and later a $10 million additional fine, as well as the 40 months in prison. Um, so did an interview on with a guy named Nick Moses on Nick Moses' podcast. Um, Apparently he got out for early on good behavior, and he goes on to state that out of the 14.5 million that he owes Nintendo, he's only been able to pay off $175 so far. So they took that in $25 monthly installments from his income from a job in the prison library. Um, so his wages will continue to be garnished until the full amount is paid off, though his agreement with Nintendo only allows them to take 25 to 30% of his pay. Uh, he also stated that while Team Executor earned at least tens of millions of dollars on proceeds, he only got a small fraction of that. I had read an article that put his earnings at roughly $325 to $350,000 or something like that. And it's just sort of this is goes on to talk about how Nintendo has historically been extremely aggressive when dealing with hackers and other perceived violations of its copyright. They've gone after influencers, modders, ROM sites, and other video games. Um, and I think this is the U.S. District Judge Robert Lasnik reportedly has said that Bowser's sentence was in part a message to deter other hackers. I mean, this is kind of it is shockingly like sort of heavy-handed. I guess I would say, even though we know that Nintendo has been fairly litigious in the past, and so it's an interesting kind of situation where he he just got the book thrown at him. I mean, granted, what he was doing was probably morally wrong, but this just feels like a little. Um, I don't know. I don't have a good feeling about this, and especially coming from a company. And again, I'm not advocating for cheating or stealing. Pirated games are typically stolen games, but uh, what I will say is that in light of just like some of like the less than uh, consumer friendly moves that Nintendo has made, and just sort of like the elimination of the eShop and stuff like that. And yes, there's the whole subscription service and junk, but it just, I don't know, that one leaves a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. So let's move on to PlayStation and PSVR 2 news. Because I read somewhere that the PlayStation VR 2 is underperforming. I just wanted to see. Even though I've heard it's an absolutely amazing piece of tech, I think it has just. And did it? I'm seeing a lot of. Oh, okay. So here's an article from Push Square from 3 days ago, and this is PSVR 2 sales. Yeah, I agree. May actually be stronger than has been suggested. Huh. Estimates paint a more positive picture. And so this was published last Saturday at 8:30 a.m. by Sammy Barker over at pushsquare.com. So, and he goes on to write that earlier in the month, a Bloomberg report cited analysis from IDC's Francisco Geronimo, suggesting that PSVR 2 was off to a slow start and would need a price cut to avoid complete disaster. Um, they go on to write this prompted plenty of hand wringing from enthusiasts who pointed to many perceived problems with the product, including its cost, software selection, and lack of backwards compatibility, which are all kind of like not ideal. But more context suggests that the headset may not be off to the same dismal start as been reported, however. Bloomberg anticipates that the PSVR 2 sold between 270,000 and 300,000 units from launch to the end of March, which would actually make it the fastest selling wired headset ever released. In fact, it took PSVR 5 months to reach 915,000 units, while PSVR 2 may have managed a third of that in one. Um, Now, the danger here is that sales could slow to a crawl, especially when it's only available from PS Direct in many major territories. It's also worth noting that the 270K to 300,000 is an estimate and hasn't been confirmed by the Japanese giant. We might learn more about PSVR 2's actual install base during the company's next earnings call. Um, they go on to write, regardless of whether the headset has started slow or strong, we still think the organization needs to show more of its hand and outline what kind of software we can look forward to for the device in the coming months. Our first hands on with Firewall Ultra painted a promising picture of the future, but as the only Sony published project in the peripherals pipeline, there needs to be more. Um, so just taking a beat on that real quick, I'm interested in this. I'm, I'm not really a Sony pony. I've been much more Sony uh, centric in the last couple of years. Just since, well, I mean, originally I was a 360 guy, and then in the PS4, Xbox One era, I made the transition initially over to PS3 and then PS4 into uh, PS5, and there's a rumored Q Lite device, which is a streaming device, and I'm waiting more details. But as somebody who really enjoys his backbone, if the Q Lite performs as well or better than a backbone, um, I might be interested because I like streaming. I like the remote play. It's kind of it gets a fair amount of use in our house. So there's that. As far as and again, it's I think the big thing here is like the biggest sort of critique I can level at that is what I've heard is that while the library is not bad for PSVR two, there's no real like killer apps. Um, a lot of people have talked about like Call of the Mountain, the Horizon game, is good, but they don't feel like it's really a must play sort of experience. It lacks the Half Life Two VR game, kind of like buzz or hype. So it's like definitely eventually I'm interested in PSVR two, and like sort the jury's still pretty out on that. So last but not least, let's talk a little bit about Xbox. And there was a couple things in here, and it's like guys, like here's the deal. I'm gonna kind of be beating up on Xbox because they just make it so easy. Um, there were a couple things, and they're all sort of related. So there's a few articles here, and again, I just googled Xbox news here, and there's a report according to Digital Foundry that Ghostwire Tokyo actually performs uh, significantly worse on Xbox Series X and S than it does on PS5. Um, so there's, like I said, there's an article from Eurogamer. Um, Pure Xbox has an article, and Game Rant. Both, all three of those, like sort of showed up at the top here. So if you want to go check one of those out, there's also sort of the Redfall debacle, which Redfall is has they've it's been confirmed. It's coming out this year, but it's coming out initially without a 60 frames per second mode. It has only a 30 FPS modes. Um, and I think like the big thing that I've heard there and the big sort of like gig there, and I think some of this is overblown. Um, but this is a first person shooter. It's a co-op sort of multiplayer experience, and the fact that it's not 60 frames is kind of, at the very least, I'd say a little concerning, especially since this is a first party title, and I think it's already been delayed once. And since Microsoft has sort of positioned itself like the Xbox as the most powerful console, the fact that they can't get a first party game to run at 60 frames a second is it's a little problematic. In addition, there was an article, and I think what sort of there's an article that written by Paul Tassi over at Forbes. He wrote a couple days ago that, and the article here is this the article is titled "I have some concerns about Xbox and Game Pass," and again, Paul Tassi over at Forbes writes this. And he sort of remarks on the fact that Xbox has really had a pretty problematic rollout, and it's honestly they've had a really rough decade for the most part. Like the 360 was a massive success, but the Xbox One era, they really they got clobbered, and we don't have the exact numbers, but they do estimate that they lost the sales, uh, sort of the sales rates to the PS4 by like a 2-to-1 margin. Um, and so he does go on to write here in the actual article, and I'm quoting him. Now we are 2.5 years into the Xbox Series S and X generation, and things were supposed to be different. Microsoft did learn from their mistakes with their hardware and produced a powerful, relatively non-controversial console. They had bought up an enormous number of talented studios that were supposed to start cranking out games to rival Sony and Nintendo's slate. That has not happened yet, and it still feels like the first potentially mega successful blockbuster they produce, maybe Starfield this coming fall, which was delayed a full year. But even that is not a guarantee. Um, and he goes on to say that it's not to say that Xbox hasn't had any hits. In fact, I think the other year they had He goes on to mention this. He's like, they did in fact win Publisher of the Year on Metacritic in 2021 with high scores for games like Microsoft Flight Simulator, Forza Horizon, and Psychonauts 2. And recently they surprised everyone with the instant launch of the quite fun Hi-Fi Rush. But it feels like the major success stories end there. Um, and he goes on to write that there seems to be an undercurrent of mismanagement among first party studios, new and old, when it comes to large scale releases. And I think like the things he talks there, the new, we haven't seen anything from the new Fable game, Perfect Dark or Avowed, like, those, there's a lot of radio silence. um and he goes on to say that there's whispers that some of the projects may be undergoing difficulties, particularly like I've seen rumors about Perfect Dark. And the problem, the highest profile release in the last 3 years has been Halo Infinite, and he goes on to write here, which had some initial enthusiasm. I mean, and apparently a really good game, but really has struggled to find its grit, like its footing as a live service game. And it's taken a really long time for them to get the game, that part of the game, to be in an okay state. And it's actually, for 343, I think it's just sort of, it's brought up a lot of questions about 343 and how that studio is being run. And then he goes on to mention Redfall and Starfield. They're two Bethesda based productions. And it's too early, and I'm reading from the article again here, but while it's too early to judge those final products, Redfall was delayed six plus months and is still launching without a 60 FPS option. Starfield was delayed an entire year after confidently projecting a specific November 11th, 2022 release date. Um, and again, he goes on to sort of like talk about Xbox Game Pass, etc. But I think he just points out that, like, Microsoft is actually in a pretty troublesome state right now, or troubled state right now. And I mean, like, here's the reality. Um, and I know I can be pretty hard on it, and I don't like some of the future that I think Xbox is trying to peddle with Game Pass. But what I would really like to see is, I'd like to see all three, uh, Nintendo, Sony, and Xbox Xbox or Microsoft here find some footing. I mean, like, I think, Sony's like crying and bemoaning the loss of Call of Duty and everything else. And actually, I think I read somewhere that like X Defiant has outperformed Call of Duty. And again, that one, I wasn't paying that much attention to it, but it's like, all of the ABK stuff aside, um I think right now, all three of these companies, like Nintendo's fine. They'll always be fine. Tears of the Kingdom looks like it's going to be a certified banger. They're going to sell a bunch of those OLED Tears of the Kingdom special edition Switches. Like, Nintendo's going to be fine. And honestly, like, I think I said it. Like, there's an event going on for Nintendo later on. This year, and I'm pretty sure that they're going to be unveiling. Like, I'm fairly confident that they're going to be unveiling the next version, or the Switch successor, the Super Switch, whatever you want to call it. Um, Sony, I think, has struggled a little bit, and I think mostly that's just like their unwillingness. I mean, Logan and Micah over on the TRG podcast, they were talking about this recently, but I think like the biggest struggle is like they're shackling themselves to like the PS4 generation, um, because there's a lot of PS4s out in the wild. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's a significant amount. Um, and you don't want to leave that audience behind unnecessarily. But I think like w- some of the biggest things that I've noticed is like technically is like, you know, I love God of War Ragnarok, but there were times where I was a little frustrated because it felt like a PS4 game, and it could have been so much more than that. And again, I get it. It was probably being designed for PS4 to begin with. But all that being said, I think like I just kind of read some of these articles, and again, I like to kind of beat up on Microsoft because like they've got all the money, and you know they have thrown money at this thing for years, and just for whatever reason haven't been able to crack the nut. And so, like I said, I'd like to see all three of them reach sort of a healthy state. And I don't hate the idea of, each one of them sort of carving out like their own sort of thing in the market. Um, and I think that that's really what needs to happen. But I think there's room in the market for all three. Um, but we'll see. Like I said, I am a little concerned about Microsoft at this point. I just feel like I said, the stuff with Redfall, you know, Starfield, and granted, these are Bethesda. Well, Redfall's technically Arcane, but Arcane is not a super. These they tend to make sims like these deep sim games like Dishonored and Elder Scrolls and that kind of stuff. And so there's a lot of stuff that happens underneath the surface that probably like chews up a ton of sort of like processor um, power and bandwidth. But yeah, like I said, so that's just some like I don't know. I don't think they were super spicy takes. I think, you know, all three of them are, Nintendo as usual is just sort of doing its own thing and killing it. Sony is just I don't know what Sony's doing either. Like, personally, I think I'm interested in sort of some of the tech pieces that they're sort of putting out there. Um, like I said, the stuff with the PSVR two, it's we'll see, and we'll see how that sort of. I don't think that just sort of doubling back. I don't think they're going to see like wild numbers with PSVR two, even though it's supposed to be a heck of a piece of kit. So I think it's going to be that's more of an enthusiast device. And what I really think they ought to do with that is just open it up to like the PC community. But and again, but like I said, the biggest sort of question mark is just like what's going on with Microsoft. There's just seems to be a lot of problems over there. So, anyways, that's all I got, guys. And like I said, not so spicy takes. I guess they're a little spicy. I don't know. They're just some takes on the news. Nate takes on the news. I don't know, but hey. Anyways, guys, it's been a bite sized. You know the things, and until next time, just be good, do the things, guys. Talk to you later. All right, bye bye.